Time for the promised CSS theory. A lot will be explained in this meeting. I will try to give you a lot of foundations so that it will be easier for us to work with CSS later on. At the beginning, I would like to show you the more or less official CSS logo. The first thing that probably catches your eye is the number 3. This number means that today we are dealing with the third version of this language. CSS technology is constantly evolving and the numbers in its name show it pretty well. But let's start with the most basic things related to this technology. What is this whole CSS? CSS is cascading style sheets. It's some sort of a mechanism or a way for us to define the look, layout, and behavior of the elements on a website. CSS is a powerful tool that can make a website that is a plain text and a bunch of images look amazing. This is the job of CSS. CSS determines the appearance, layout, and behavior of the elements that are created using the HTML tags. But what does this mean in practice? We can see it in this slide. Here we have an image symbolized by a blue square with rounded corners and a paragraph of text next to it. What could be defined here in CSS? For example, square color, text color, square corner roundness, uppercase text, etc. But we also see that the relationship between the image and the text is such that the text lines up next to the image, not below it or above it, but always next to it. Such a relationship between the elements on a website can also be determined using CSS. Now let's focus on the definition. Since the CSS is cascading style sheets, let's just say what the style sheets themselves are. Let's divide this definition into two parts. So the style sheet is a file with the CSS extension created according to the rules of the CSS language. Let's say right away that CSS, like HTML, is not a programming language, although there are some elements that are specific to programming, such as for example functions. CSS has its own rules and appropriate vocabulary. These are certain grammatical constructs that we call selectors, properties, values, and keywords. But for a style sheet to be a style sheet at all, it must have the CSS extension, it must be written according to the CSS language rules, and it must be integrated with the HTML file. The second part of the CSS definition refers to the cascading. Cascading is a fantastic thing to learn. Understanding its principles is a challenge to our logical thinking and memory. Cascading is a set of rules for the browser that determines what rule for a certain element on a website should be used to determine that element's appearance, layout, and behavior. If we create a p tag, we know that the browser will give it a default rule for its appearance. If we will create our own rule for the p tag, the browser will already have two rules for the same element. And cascading is responsible for determining which one of these rules is more important and which one should be applied to a certain element. Let's see what it looks like in an example. Style sheet and cascading. We have two rules, P and red. They have certain properties and values inside them. So we want P to be 40 pixels and blue. On the right, we have the example from HTML, the p tag text and the p tag text2, which has a class. Our first rule matches both p tags. So in theory, both texts should be blue. But we can see that we also have a second rule with the class red that matches the second p tag. The result is that the text of the first tag is actually blue, but the text of the second tag is red. This is because of the rules of cascading that you will learn about soon. In this case, the point is that the class is more important than the tag-based selector. But we will learn all about this really soon. Now let's describe exactly what these names are so that they will form in our head because we should use them properly. Rule. In this case, div p, which is a selector, a part of the rule. Next we have a declaration block represented by the curly brackets. And we have a declaration inside the curly brackets. Declaration may be single or multiple. It consists of properties and values separated by colons and ended with semicolons. All these elements make up the CSS rule. And the CSS rule is the way to declare the appearance of an HTML element using CSS. A rule in CSS is like a sentence in any spoken language, a basic communication cell made up of smaller pieces. The first element of the rule is a selector. In our case, it's the simplest selector that exists. A selector that consists of pointing to a specific tag. In this case, all the p tags on the website would be selected and included by the browser with this rule. The selector indicates all the matching elements on the website. It defines what elements we mean. Understanding how to build selectors is very important in CSS, because not only we have to know how to do something, but also how to get to the element that we want to style. The selector is like a path to our element, and that's the first thing we always define when creating a CSS rule. What if there was no p tag on our website? This would not be an error. The browser would simply remember to apply this rule to every p tag that would appear on the website. Of course, it doesn't make sense from a web developer perspective to create rules for not existing elements, but technically it's not an error. Let's see it with an example. We have a rule here for all the p tags in our document. We specified that they should be 20 pixels big and they should have a red color, and all our p tags will obey this rule. In addition to the simple selectors consisting of a single tag, we also have the complex selectors. Complex, for example, in such a way that the one element is nested within the other. Now let's focus on the first way to nest selectors using spaces. A space in CSS selectors indicates a descendant, but how to read it? Take a look at our example. Here we have a div space p. Complex selectors in CSS are best to read from the end. In our case, take the p tag which is in the div tag. Take a p tag which is a descendant of the div tag. We can see on the right that the only p tag that is in the div tag is the element marked in yellow. Note that the other p tags in our example are not in the div tag, so they don't apply to the rule used in our example. Another complex selector that we will use very often is the class. We create a CSS class selector with the dot. We see in our CSS rule a dot box. So in this case, we are telling the browser to find all the elements that have the class box. So the browser will go to the HTML code, as we do at this point on the right part of the screen, and will find all the matching elements which in our example are highlighted in yellow. As we can see, it is a div tag and a p tag, because we didn't specify the specific tag with the class box. We referred to every element with this class, no matter if it's a div tag, a p tag, section, or a footer. Let's return to the topic of the descendants. We need to know that all the elements on our website are the descendants of the body tag, but not every element is its child. In this example, we can see a p tag that is a descendant of the div tag and the body tag, just like we are the descendant of our father and our grandfather. And just as we are our father's child, not our grandfather's, the p tag is also a child of the div tag, but not the child of the body tag. P tag is the body tag's descendant. I will explain it more in a moment. At this slide, we can see HTML code on the left side of the screen and the CSS rules on the right side of the screen. So the first one is section h1, which we can read as take h1 tag, which is a descendant of the section, and we can see it highlighted in yellow. The second one is section p, which we can read as take the p tag, which is a descendant of a section, or take a p tag, which is in the section. The next one is section strong, which is take the strong tag, which is in the section. The next one is section ul, so we can read it like take the ul tag, which is a descendant of the section. And the last one, section li, which is the same as any previous one. So we take the li tag, which is in the section, or in other words, take the li tag, which is descendant of the section. In this way, we can narrow down our styling to the elements that are only in this section. If we would have a main tag next to a section and a p tag in it, it would not be taken into account. We would only style the p tags in the section because only these are important to us. Remember that a space in CSS selectors indicates a descendant. Let's check another way to refer not to a descendant but to a child. As you know, you are not a child of your grandfather and great-grandfather, even though you are their descendant. You are only your parents' child. So in CSS, we also have a selector that allows us to refer only to the child of a certain element. Let's take a look on our first row, where you can see section, greater than sign, h1. So let's read it from the end. and we will get take the h1 tag, which is the child of the section. And we can see in our HTML code, this h1 is marked in yellow. The second example is section greater than p, which we can read as take the p tag, which is the child of the section. And we can see this p tag in our HTML example as well. But let's go to our third example, where we can see section greater than strong. So it's take a strong tag, which is a child of a section. And we can see that there is no such element in our HTML example, because our strong tag is a child of a p and a descendant of a section. So this strong tag would not be included in this CSS rule. Let's go to our another example. We have a section greater than UL, which is take the UL tag, which is the child of a section. And we can see it clearly in our example. But then we can go to our last rule, which is a section greater than LI. So this is going to be take the LI tag, which is a child of a section. And we can see there's no such element in our HTML document, because our LI tags are the children of the UL tag and the descendant of a section. So child has to be nested directly in the element. But you have to know that no such element is not an error. The browser will just not apply this rule to any element. As you might guess, a child is a greater than sign in CSS selectors. Let's add another way to refer to a specific element. In this case, the first younger brother. When we talk about the brother in CSS, we mean the parallel element. So with the plus sign in CSS, we mark the first parallel element, and only the first one, not another one or any other. That is why it is called the first younger brother. Let's take a look to our first CSS rule in this slide, where we can see h1 plus p. So once again, the best way is to read it from the end. So we say take the p tag, which is the first younger brother of the h tag. And we can see this p tag highlighted in our HTML document, which is exactly the first younger brother of our h1 tag. Let's go to our second example, which is p plus ul. So we can read it like take the ul tag, which is the first younger brother of the p tag. And as you can see in our HTML code, it's also highlighted in yellow because this ul tag is the first younger brother of the p tag in this section. The last rule in our example is li plus li. So we can read it like take the li tag, which is the first younger brother of another li tag. And you can clearly see in our HTML file that this is the second li tag in our ul tag, because it's the first younger brother of the first li tag in our ul tag. You can see that section does not have a younger brother in this example, but if we would put another section next to it, the second section would be the first younger brother of this first section. Let's remember that the younger brother, direct brother, is a plus sign in CSS selectors. Here's another example to make things even more clear for us. If we write such a selector h1 plus p, then only the first p tag will be taken into account. It is the first younger brother of the h1 tag. All the other p tags are also younger brothers, but the plus sign refers only to the first younger brother. The rest is not taken into account. So what if we want to refer to every younger brother and not just the first one? To refer to all younger brothers, that is to all parallel elements, we must use the tilde key. The tilde is on the keyboard under the escape key and above the tab key. This tells the browser to take all the p tags that are the younger brothers of the h1 tag. And I specially put an extra p tag under our section to show you that it won't be taken into account because its older brother is a section in this case and not the h1 tag. There are different methodologies for writing down the selectors. Sometimes classes are more used, sometimes identifiers. Nevertheless, it is important to get to know these relationships between the elements and be able to apply to them in CSS. All these characters that allows us to identify a family member of a certain element are combinators. A combinator is a way of defining a selector, and it points out some kind of a relationship between specific elements. So as you can see, we have a space, which means a descendant. And as we can see on example, we have a rule h1 space p, which we can read from the end like this. Take the p tag, which is a descendant of the h1 tag. Next we have a plus sign, which is the first younger brother, or a first sister element, which we can call it. And for this example, we have a rule p plus ul, which again we can read from the end like take the ul tag, which is the first younger brother of the p tag. The next sign is a tilde, which means every younger brother. And we have a rule for this combinator, where we can see div, tilde, div. And we can read it like take all the div tags that are younger brothers of another div tag. And the last example is greater than sign, which means a child in CSS. And we can see an example for that, where we can see ul is greater than li, which means take the li tag, which is a child of the ul tag. Another thing I would like us to remember is the universal selector. The universal selector is represented by an asterisk. It applies to all the HTML elements on our website, including the HTML tag. In this example, we can see that thanks to the application of such a rule, all the elements in our HTML document will have a red color. The importance of the asterisk and cascading is very low, and any other rule will override it, but we will often use the selector to reset the default styles, so it's good to know it. The next thing is the declaration block. The first element of the CSS rule was a selector. The second is a declaration block. It is represented by curly brackets. In this block, we write all the declarations. An empty declaration block will not be an error for the browser, but creating empty CSS rules is illogical in terms of web development. Everything in the curly brackets is a declaration. There may be one declaration or many, but we will talk about that in a moment. A single declaration consists of a property on the left and a value on the right. Properties and values must be separated by a colon, and a semicolon should appear at the end of each declaration. However, a semicolon is not required at the end of the last declaration, but we should always try to put semicolons at the end of each declaration because it is never an error and allows us to avoid mistakes when, for example, we add another declaration to the rule after some time and forget to add the semicolon at the end of the previous one, because then it's a serious error. The property starts with the letter and is usually one word, or consists of several words joined by a dash. We cannot name the properties as we want. Properties belong to the set of expressions recognized by the browser. If we make a mistake in a property name, it will not be recognized by the browser. If a property name consists of two words, they are separated by a dash. There are hundreds or even thousands of properties. You don't need to know all of them. You will not use all of them. And you will often look for many properties on the internet when you'll need them. The second part of the declaration is the value. The values may be very different. Sometimes they can be pixels, percentages, or specific words. The syntax of the values is very different, and we need to get used to it. The numeric values can have different units, such as em, rem, and others. We can also write the color values in several ways. We can use a specific word, a hex number, or the RGB function. We will use it all intuitively, and you will see that it will become a habit for you and will be very easy for you after this course. I've already shown you the class selector. The classes will be most often used by us for work. In this case, the selector does not point to a certain HTML tag. It indicates every element with the class attribute with a specific name. In CSS, we refer to the class with a dot. If there's a tag name in the selector before the dot, as in our second example, the selector will match all the tags with a certain type with the specific class. In this case, all the p tags with the class 1. At the top, you can see how to add the class attribute to our element in the HTML file. We might as well use an identifier, although it's less popular. The identifier is also known as the ID and is marked with the hash in CSS. The first example refers to any element with an ID attribute named 1. The second points to the p tag with the ID 1. ID differs from the class in that ID with a certain name can only be assigned to one element, and a class with a certain name can be assigned to many elements, as we have seen in the previous examples. Since the ID can only appear once in a website, this first entry in our example should always be enough. We don't need to be more specific. But the second example is not a mistake, it's just a longer record. The next thing is grouping the selectors. More than one selector can be specified after the comma, as we can see in these examples. We could write two separate rules for the p tag and the div tag. But if they were to be the same, we could use two selectors after the comma for one rule. After the comma, we can indicate not only tag selectors, but also class selectors, ID selectors, and every other, as you can see in the second example. And here you can see in an example that the same two rules for two different selectors are grouped into one rule for several selectors. Now let's take a short break and come back to the rest of the theory in a moment, where we will focus on CSS grammar.